Hey everyone, hope you're well. So I'm just going to run through a quick liquid culture recipe using light malt extract or brewer's malt. It's what I find the easiest and most diverse for sort of all mushroom types. Doesn't really matter what it is, everything seems to like the light malt extract. And then if you're just getting into sort of liquid cultures, this is a good one to start with because it's nice and cheap and you don't have to get loads of different chemicals and start mixing stuff together. So it's a good sort of intro into it and also to carry on using throughout as well because it works for everything. So things you're going to need: tin foil for the lid when you're pressure cooking, a pressure cooker which we'll go through later, some jars, mason jars are best with your lids that have been pre-done, so you've got your injection port and your filter and your stir bars as well, because that's vital when you're wanting to mix it. If you don't have a magnetic stirrer, which is one of these, you can also use marbles or anything that you sort of shake around, but don't use broken glass or anything like that. That's not ideal because when you come in trying to syringe it up, it just gets messy and horrible. Some kind of beaker or measuring jug as well to measure in your water, and you want to add 500 ml of water. So once you've remembered to boil your kettle, pour in 500 ml if you're using your magnetic stirrer, and then one for the pan. Always remember to use hot water as well, because if you use cold water, the light malt extract will just bunch up and just turn into one ball, and trying to get it to thin out and dissolve can be harder work. So get that in your pan. Again, because you've already boiled it, you don't want to, because it's already been boiled, you don't need to get it up to mega daft heat. You just want to simmer it and get the heat through it so it dissolves. So I use a baking spoon, it takes out any guesswork. If a teaspoon, is it a level teaspoon, is it a heap teaspoon? So get your magnetic stirrer on. So 1 teaspoon, and you go. So I'll give it a whisk with a fork, a normal whisk, and I've got this contraption, let's call it a plunge whisk, and that works really well. Pump away. And now what you want to do is just give that a simmer and just an occasional whisk to make sure any sort of bunched up particulates are sort of nicely separating for about 15 minutes. And then if you're using a magnetic stirrer and a heat plate, same thing. Just be careful with this stuff because it bunches up like a nightmare as well. But get that stuff in there. And make sure your spinning bar is still spinning. I say give that 15 minutes or so, just let that spin out, let it all dissolve in nicely, and then once that's dissolved you're ready to then transfer it into your jars and then into your pressure cooker as well for cooking. Once you're happy with your consistency and everything's dissolved, you can knock them off. If you're using a heated stir plate, be careful, they get hot and they will burn and they hurt. I can vouch for that. So once they're done, if you've not already put your bar in, just bang that in there. Make sure to give yourself a bit of breathing space in there as well because you don't want to overfill it. Bang the lid on and then just take it so it's just before tight, because what you want to do is just allow any air to escape that builds up once in the pressure cooker, because if you pressurise it and have it tight, when you go to put your syringe in, whether it's spores or whether it's LC, the pressure that's built up in the jar will pull it straight out and just try and empty the whole thing into the LC jar, and also pull any possible contaminated air as well in with it. So the best thing to do is just give it, just so it's nice and loose, and then when you pull it out of your pressure cooker you can just do it and do a final tighten where it's in a kind of semi-sterile sanitised area, rather than once you've got it out pulling the general air in with it, which isn't ideal because you can get some more contamination or possible contamination that way. So this is just a double mason lid with a port and an injection port in, and just bang that in. And that's it. what you can do is turn them upside down, but then you've got to faff and mess around on the other end of it, and I just think there's more chance of contamination as well if you turn it around and do that. So again, just do it and just give it so it's just got a little bit, and then that when you pull out the PC. So again, just a bit of foil and just scrunch that over the top, and again, doesn't have to be anything special. That's just to take any sort of direct heat from when you get it to 15 psi off the lids and off the injection ports and filter valves. Just keeps them a bit more protected. So pressure cooking time. So this is a Presto 23 quart pressure cooker. Really simple to use. Just whack it on and let it go. So I fill it up. I've got a trivet in there. I fill it up so the water sort of just touches or is just under the trivet. More if you're doing grain bags, I always think to keep the water below, because the water pressure is a little bit lower in the water than it will be in the atmosphere, so you potentially may not get contamination. So I always do it so it's a little bit lower. So literally, once you put your water in, just bang your jars in. Get your lid. Make sure you line up the arrows, and then just turn that and lock it in, and then you're good to go. So what you want to do is get it so it's up to 15 psi for 15 minutes. Make sure your rocker's on as well, and you'll know when it gets to 15 psi, because 9 times out of 10 this will start to dance, which is completely normal. It may or may not, depends on how tight that fit is and how new it is as well, so don't worry. But as long as it's got to 15 psi, you're good to go. And then what you'll normally do is once it gets to 15 psi, just knock the heat down on your hob as well, to make sure that you don't sort of blow it out. You'll just end up losing loads of steam for no reason, and then potentially lose loads of steam, and then you may dry out your pot as well, when you don't need to lose as much steam by keeping it at 15 psi, and especially when you're only doing it for 15 minutes. So when you get to the point where you can see the pressure valve starting to sort of bob and splutter, just a little trick to stop it being annoying is just get a teaspoon or something metal, something that's not your finger, because it's very hot, and just hold it down for sort of 10 seconds or so. So 10, 9. And if you release, it'll pop up, and at least it'll just stop that sort of incessant bouncing and spluttering water everywhere. It does my head in. So when you're pressure cooking just LC jars, they'll get to pressure pretty quick. Like I've been doing this for 10 minutes now, and it's got to 5 psi, so you're probably looking at about 15 minutes or so, and it'll be at full pressure. So right, we're at 15 psi now, so this is where you start your 15-minute timer. So once it's at 15 psi, you can set your 15-minute timer and then cook this for 15 minutes. Obviously you can just start to hear that rocker now starting to bob, so to save losing the excess steam, we'll just knock that back down, because that's sort of getting itself up to 16-17 psi now, but that's absolutely normal. What you don't want to do is just touch that or knock that, because if you drop the pressure too much on the inside, you'll blow the tops off your lids and then spit LC all over your cooker, which you don't want to do. So once that's dropped down, just leave that for 15 minutes and just make sure that it's staying at 15 psi. So we're 15 minutes up, and this is a sort of critical part of your liquid culture, and whether it ends up in the bottom of your PC or remains in your jar. Literally, all you want to do now is turn it off and walk away, and let it go down. You need to let the pressure go down to at least 0 before you even think about touching this, because if you knock your rocker and you start releasing pressure into the vessel now, you'll end up with LC splurting out your jars and going everywhere. So at this point, just turn your hob off and walk away and leave it. And what I normally do is just leave it overnight to the next day so I can use it, because even if you let it go down to 0 psi, it's still too hot to do anything with. So just leave it overnight, let it cool down properly, and come back to it in the morning.